The first thing to understand is the silence, not the silence of an empty world, because the Stone Age is never empty, but the silence left behind after almost everything soft has vanished. A hide shelter collapses into soil, a woven cord rots away, a wooden spear sinks into mud and disappears unless some rare accident protects it from time. Footprints harden for a moment, then are erased by rain, wind, animals, or the slow work of seasons. What remains, again and again, is stone. A sharp edge struck from a river cobble, a hand axe shaped with patience, a flake thin enough to cut skin, scrape bark, open a carcass, or carve a point from bone. The Stone Age receives its name from the material that survives, not from the only material that mattered. Long before bronze, long before iron, long before written kings and city walls, human survival is built from a far richer world of wood, fibre, fire, memory, gesture, skill, and cooperation. But stone is the witness that refuses to vanish, and so the story begins with it, lying in ancient ground like a message from hands that are no longer here. Imagine a morning before metal, before fields, before roads, before the idea of a village has become permanent in most places. The air is cold enough to make breath visible. The sun has not yet climbed over the horizon, and the world is full of signs that must be read correctly. A broken branch may mean wind, or it may mean a heavy animal passed in the dark. A smell near the water may mean fresh mud, or a predator close enough to matter. A flock lifting suddenly from grass may reveal movement beyond the rise. Survival is not a simple contest of strength. It is a tension stretched across an entire landscape. Early humans and their relatives live by noticing tiny differences, the right kind of stone in a stream bed, the season when a root becomes edible, the sound of distant hooves, the safest way across open ground, the tree that burns slowly, the cave that shelters without trapping smoke, the place where water remains when the dry season sharpens the world. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy, because this story is not about one invention or one species, but about the long, difficult experiment of becoming human before metal made the world louder. The Stone Age is often imagined as primitive, as if the people inside it are waiting for history to begin. That picture is misleading. History does not begin with writing. Writing merely begins recording certain kinds of power. For millions of years before inscriptions, humans and earlier hominins are already solving problems with tools, movement, fire, social bonds, and inherited knowledge. The earlier stone tools push the story far beyond Homo sapiens, into a world where the makers may include ancient relatives who do not yet look fully like us. Scholars still debate exactly which species first shaped some of the oldest known tools, and the evidence remains incomplete. But the basic fact is astonishing long before modern humans exist. Hands are already selecting stone, striking it with intention, and creating edges sharper than anything nature usually leaves lying ready for use. That act changes the relationship between body and world. Teeth and nails are no longer the only cutting instruments. A creature with a fragile hand can suddenly open tough hides, process plants, shape wood, break bone, and reach calories that would otherwise remain locked away. A stone flake is small, but in deep time it is almost a new organ. Yet the Stone Age is not a single age in any simple sense. It stretches across an almost unimaginable span, from the first known stone tool traditions millions of years ago to the rise of farming and polished stone in the Neolithic, and in some parts of the world, stone technologies continue alongside or beyond the arrival of metals. This is not one straight line from crude to clever. It is a branching river. In Africa, early toolmakers adapt across changing environments. In Eurasia, different human populations learn to live with cold, forests, grasslands, mountains, and coastlines. In island worlds, people cross water and carry knowledge into places no earlier human had reached. Some groups hunt large animals, others gather shellfish, dig tubers, fish rivers, trap small game, harvest seeds, and move with the rhythm of plants. Some live near caves, but many never do. Caves simply preserve traces better, giving them a false importance in our imagination. The open-air camps, brush shelters, windbreaks, wooden frames, skin coverings, and temporary hearths of most Stone Age life have mostly dissolved back into the earth. This is one of the first mysteries of the human past. The ordinary was often the most fragile. A stone hand axe can survive for 500,000 years. A basket carrying food may last a season and then vanish forever. A child may learn a route through a valley. An elder may remember where animals cross after snow. A group may pass down a technique for preparing a bitter plant safely, and none of this leaves an easy fossil. Knowledge is the real technology. But knowledge decays unless it is carried by living minds. What survives in the record suggests that early humans were not merely reacting to the world, they were organizing it. A tool made at one place may be carried to another. A stone type may be chosen from far away because it fractures better. A camp may be used again and again because it offers water, visibility, fuel, and access to animals. Even before symbolic art becomes visible, the landscape is already mapped by memory. Fire deepens this transformation, though its story is more complicated than simple discovery. Fire is not a single moment when someone suddenly becomes modern. It is first encountered in lightning, burned grass, volcanic edges, and natural wildfires. To use it regularly is another matter. To preserve embers, feed flames, control smoke, cook food, harden wood, warm bodies, extend the day, and keep dangerous animals at a distance requires skill repeated until it becomes culture. The exact timing of habitual fire use is still debated because burned earth can be difficult to interpret, and not every ancient hearth survives clearly. But when fire becomes dependable, life changes at night. Darkness is no longer absolute. Around a controlled flame, food softens, stories can be carried, tools can be repaired, bodies can rest in cold places, and social life gathers around a center of heat and light. It is hard to exaggerate what that means. A flame is protection, kitchen, workshop, signal, memory, and miniature sun. The world these early people face is not stable. Climate swings repeatedly reshape continents. Grasslands expand and shrink. Forests retreat, return, and fragment. Sea levels fall during glacial periods, exposing land bridges and coastlines now drowned beneath the ocean. Deserts pulse between harsher and greener phases. Lakes appear, spread, shrink, and leave salt flats behind. Animals migrate, vanish from regions, or adapt to new habitats. Human groups survive because they are mobile in thought as much as in body. They cannot force the world to remain familiar, so they learn to follow change. Some carry tool traditions across vast stretches of time. Others innovate quickly when a new environment demands it. A stone point useful in open country may not solve the problems of dense woodland. A heavy hand axe may be excellent for butchery but clumsy for fine work. A coastline rewards different knowledge from an inland steppe. Before metal, survival depends on a toolkit that is physical, mental, and social all at once. There is a dry understatement hidden in the archaeological record stone tools are durable. but people are not. Bones rarely fossilize. Entire populations may pass through a region and leave only a scatter of flakes, a broken animal bone, a stain of charcoal, a footprint sealed by lucky sediment. A life of hunger, endurance, cleverness, fear, tenderness, and skill may become, after thousands of generations, one chipped pebble in a museum drawer. This is why the Stone Age must be approached with humility. It is not silent because nothing happened. It is silent because time is a ruthless editor. The evidence remains incomplete, and yet the pieces that do survive are enough to reveal a world of astonishing persistence. Human ancestors endure predators, cold, heat, injury, migration, childbirth, seasonal scarcity, and the constant uncertainty of finding food tomorrow. They do it not by being invincible, but by being flexible. The absence of metal is not the absence of technology. Stone can be flaked into blades, ground into axes, shaped into scrapers, points, borers, and cores. Bone can become a needle, awl, point, or harpoon. Antler can serve as a pressure tool. Wood can become a spear, digging stick, handle, trap, container, support, or boat part. Though most wooden evidence is lost unless waterlogged or sealed away from decay, plant fibers can become cord, net, sling, mat, carrying bag, binding or clothing seam. Adhesives made from resin, bitumen, ochre mixtures, or heated bark products can fasten stone to shafts. A spear with a stone point is not just a sharp rock tied to a stick, it is a compound invention, requiring knowledge of materials that expand, shrink, grip, split, and bend. To make one well is to understand a small chemistry of the natural world. This matters because the Stone Age is often reduced to hunting. Hunting is important, sometimes spectacular, and occasionally dangerous, but it is only part of the story. Gathering plants, shellfish, eggs, honey, insects, nuts, seeds, roots, and fruits may provide steady calories in many environments. Tracking animals teaches geography, but knowing plants teaches time. A fruit is not edible in all weeks. A root may be useful only after processing. A nut may require cracking stones, storage, or roasting. A poisonous plant may become food through soaking, pounding, or heat. The quiet labour of survival leaves fewer dramatic images than a hunt across the steppe, but it may have fed people more reliably. No single explanation fully accounts for how Stone Age groups survived everywhere, because there was never one Stone Age environment. There were many worlds, and human beings became specialists in general adaptability. So the story begins not with a crown, a battle, or a city, but with a hand reaching towards stone. The hand belongs first not only to us, but to a long family of human relatives whose names are still being revised as new bones and new DNA appear. Some are known from skulls, some from teeth, some from tools, some from genetic ghosts inside living people. They do not know they are ancient. They do not know they are prehistoric. They wake in weather, hunger, companionship, and danger. They make choices in the present. They teach by doing. They survive by carrying yesterday's lessons into tomorrow's uncertainty. Before metal, before writing, before agriculture transforms parts of the world, the foundation of human life is already there, fire in the dark. Tools in the hand, memory in the group, and a landscape full of clues. From that foundation, the deeper mystery opens, because the Stone Age is not simply the childhood of civilization, it is the long, testing ground in which humanity learns how to remain alive. A stone tool can lie in the open and still be recognized. But the deeper story of the Stone Age often hides in colder, darker places where the ground holds what the surface cannot. In the Altai Mountains of Siberia, above a river valley where steppe, forest, cliff, and cave meet, there is a place that seems at first like only another shelter in a hard landscape. Denisova Cave does not announce itself with walls crowded by animals, nor with a perfect skeleton waiting in ceremonial stillness. It is a cave of layers, dust, bone splinters, tools, teeth, hearth traces, animal remains, and microscopic evidence. Its importance comes from something almost invisible. In a story where stone survives better than flesh, this cave preserves fragments of bodies small enough to be overlooked, yet powerful enough to redraw the map of human origins. The cave sits in a region that matters to many kinds of people long before metal. Valleys offer movement, rivers offer water and animals, slopes give shelter and visibility. The Altai is not simply a remote backdrop, it is a meeting zone, a place where different environments press against one another. During warmer phases, forests and meadows shift through the region. During colder phases, open steppe expands, and the lives of animals and people adjust with it. Groups moving across Inner Asia could pass near this landscape again and again because rivers, herds, stone sources, and shelter create repeated pathways. What survives in the record suggests that Denisova Cave was used across a vast stretch of time by different human populations, including Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens. The cave is not the home of one people alone. It is more like a stone archive of encounters. The strangeness begins with how little was needed to change so much. A small finger bone from the cave, belonging to an ancient girl, carried DNA unlike that of known Neanderthals or modern humans. A few teeth, unusually large and difficult to place by shape alone, added to the puzzle. Later, more fragments and genetic traces in sediment deepened the picture. This is one of the great reversals in archaeology. For a long time, scientists usually needed bones to name bodies and bodies to describe species. A skull could reveal a brow ridge, a pelvis could hint at posture, a limb bone could suggest strength or movement. But Denisovans enter modern knowledge almost as genetic shadows. They are not first recognized because someone finds a complete skeleton with a familiar pattern of traits. They are recognized because ancient DNA survives inside a fragment that looks, to the untrained eye, nearly meaningless. That discovery does not merely add one more branch to the human family tree, it changes the tree itself into something more tangled. Before the genetic age, the late Stone Age human story was often told as a cleaner sequence: older humans, then Neanderthals in parts of Eurasia, then Homo sapiens spreading and replacing them. The evidence had never been quite that simple, but DNA makes the complexity impossible to ignore. Denisovans are close relatives of Neanderthals, sharing a common ancestry with them after their line split from the ancestors of modern humans. Yet they are not simply Eastern Neanderthals. They carry their own history, their own long separation, and their own contacts with others. Some ancient individuals even show direct family mixing between Denisovans and Neanderthals. The record suggests not a ladder, but a braided river, with channels dividing, meeting, disappearing underground, and reappearing far away. This matters for the complete Stone Age story, because Denisova Cave reveals a truth that stone tools alone could only hint at the world before metal was inhabited by more than one kind of human. Homo sapiens were not always alone. Across different times and places, they shared the planet with Neanderthals, Denisovans, Perhaps late surviving Homo erectus populations, Homo floresiensis on Flores, Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, and other groups whose place in the family remains debated. Some are known from enough bones to imagine their bodies. Others are known from teeth, partial skulls, or a handful of fragments. Scholars still debate how to define species in this tangled setting, because the old boundary lines blur when populations can separate for hundreds of thousands of years and still, at certain times, have children whose descendants survive. The surprising lesson is that survival before metal does not belong to one heroic lineage. It belongs to experiments. Different human groups adapt to cold plains, tropical islands, high mountains, wooded valleys, and coastlines. They make stone tools, use fire, process food, and teach by demonstration, though the details differ and much remains unseen. Denisovans in particular force the imagination eastward. For decades, the public picture of Ice Age humanity leaned heavily toward Europe. With its Neanderthal bones and painted caves, Denisova Cave shifts the center of gravity. It reminds us that Asia was not a blank space waiting for modern humans to cross. It was already inhabited, explored, and understood by ancient people whose traces are difficult to see because preservation is uneven. Research histories differ, and warm or acidic environments often destroy DNA. The absence of evidence in many regions is not evidence of absence. It is often a sign that time has done its work too well. The cave also shows how new scientific methods can recover stories from what once seemed useless. Sediment itself can contain genetic traces. Tiny bone pieces too broken to identify visually can be sorted through proteins or molecular clues. A fragment that once might have been catalogued as indeterminate can become a human life, or at least the biological trace of one. This does not make archaeology simple. Ancient DNA can be contaminated. Layers can be disturbed. A tool found in the same broad context as a bone does not always prove that the same population made it. No single explanation fully accounts for every object, every layer, and every genetic signal in a cave used over thousands of years. But the direction is clear. The Stone Age is becoming less silent not because the past is suddenly speaking plainly, but because science is learning to listen to smaller and smaller remains. Inside Denisova Cave, stone tools still matter. They anchor the story in behavior rather than only biology. But they also create a difficult question. When several human groups use the same region across time, who made which tools, a blade, scraper, point, or ornament can reveal skill, planning, and material knowledge, but it does not always carry a species label. Archaeologists must compare layers, dates, technologies, and biological evidence carefully. The evidence remains incomplete, and yet the problem itself is revealing. It means that ancient human groups may have shared similar solutions, borrowed ideas, or independently discovered effective ways to work stone. Culture does not fossilize cleanly along species lines. A sharp edge is useful no matter whose hand holds it. So Denisova Cave becomes more than the birthplace of a name. It becomes a warning against simple stories. It shows that the Stone Age cannot be reduced to a march from primitive tools to modern minds, nor to a single species slowly conquering the world. It is a crowded, changing, overlapping human landscape. People enter shelters, leave ash, break bones, shape stone, move on, return, vanish, and sometimes leave a trace so small that only a molecule remembers them. In the long silence after soft things disappear, the cave keeps a few secrets intact: a finger bone, a tooth, a smear of DNA in sediment, a layer of stone flakes from these, an entire lost population begins to take shape, and once that shape appears, even dimly, the Stone Age becomes larger, stranger, and far more human than it seemed before. The discovery of Denisovans begins with a reversal so strange that it still feels almost unnatural. Usually, a fossil comes first and the story follows. A skull rises from sediment, a jaw appears in a cave floor, a thigh bone, a tooth row, a brow ridge, a face shaped by vanished muscles, gives scientists something visible to argue over. Denisovans do not enter the human story in that familiar way. They arrive through a code hidden inside a fragment, through molecules older than memory, through a small piece of bone that does not look important enough to carry an extinct population inside it. In the deep Stone Age, where most bodies disappear and most tools lose their makers, DNA becomes a new kind of artifact. It is not shaped by hand like flint, not blackened by fire like charcoal, not polished by use like a bone point. Yet it carries a record of ancestry more intimate than any tool, because it is the body remembering itself. Ancient DNA is fragile. It breaks apart after death, damaged by water, heat, bacteria, sunlight, and time. In many places where humans lived, especially warm and wet regions, DNA vanishes so thoroughly that even important fossils become genetically silent. This is why Denisova Cave matters so much. Cold conditions, deep layers, and unusual preservation allowed genetic material to survive where it might elsewhere have dissolved into nothing. But surviving is only the first accident. The second is recognition. A tiny bone fragment must be found, handled carefully, protected from modern contamination, sampled in a clean laboratory, and read by methods sensitive enough to separate ancient signals from modern noise. The process is almost the opposite of the old image of archaeology as a brush sweeping dust from a skull. Here the decisive work happens in sterile rooms, behind masks and gloves, where scientists study not the shape of the bone, but the sequence of letters left inside it. The first genetic surprise came from mitochondrial DNA, the small ring of genetic material inherited through the maternal line. It showed that the individual from Denisova Cave was not simply a modern human, and not simply a Neanderthal. The distance was too great. Then nuclear DNA, the broader genome inherited from both parents, placed the mystery in clearer relation. The Denisovan belonged to a population closely related to Neanderthals, sharing a common ancestry with them after their deeper split from the ancestors of modern humans. But close relation is not sameness. The genome showed a separate history, one that had been developing for hundreds of thousands of years. The cave had given science an entire human group that had not been properly seen by bone shape alone. A species, or at least a distinct archaic human population, had been found through DNA before it had been fully found through anatomy. That changes the emotional weight of the Stone Age. A stone flake can tell us that someone cut, scraped, planned, or learned. DNA can tell us that someone belonged to a lineage no one knew had existed. It can reveal meetings between populations that left no written memory, no named tribe, no preserved language, and perhaps no easily identifiable tool style. In living people today, Denisovan ancestry appears as fragments scattered across genomes, especially in some populations of Oceania and parts of Asia. These are not fossils in museums. They are biological echoes carried through thousands of generations. Long after Denisovan bodies disappear from the visible record, parts of their inheritance continue in people who are not Denisovans, but whose ancestors once met them. The Stone Age, in this light, is not a vanished room sealed behind us. it is still faintly present inside living cells. This is one of the lesser-known revolutions of modern human origins research. The dead can sometimes be identified from dirt. Sediment from caves may preserve traces of DNA shed by skin, waste, blood, hair, or decomposing remains, even when no visible fossil is found in the same layer. That does not mean every grain of cave earth contains a clean human story. The evidence remains incomplete, and contamination, movement of sediments, and dating problems must be handled with great care. But the possibility itself is astonishing. A population can pass through a cave, leave almost no recognizable bones, and still be detected by molecules in the ground. For the Stone Age, this is like discovering that silence has layers, and that some of those layers can be read. Denisovans also reveal why the old habit of tying one tool tradition neatly to one human type is dangerous. If a layer contains stone tools and Denisovan DNA, it may suggest Denisovan activity, but archaeology rarely gives perfect labels. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens could all make and use tools. They could occupy similar caves at different times. They could inherit ideas, imitate techniques, or independently solve the same practical problems. A scraper does not announce the genome of its maker. A blade does not say whether the hand that struck it belonged to a Neanderthal, a Denisovan, or an early modern human. DNA helps, but it does not magically remove uncertainty. Instead, it forces a more careful story, one where biology, behavior, and culture overlap without always matching exactly. The Denisovan genome also turns the human family tree into something more restless than a tree. Branches split, yes, but they also touch again. Populations separate for long stretches, adapt to different landscapes, and then meet when climate, migration, or chance brings them back into contact. Some meetings leave no descendants, others leave genetic traces. Denisovans interbred with ancestors of some modern humans, and also with Neanderthals. One ancient individual from Denisova cave had ancestry from both a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father, a direct sign that these groups were not merely abstract branches on a diagram. They were neighbours in the deepest human sense, close enough in time and space for families to form across boundaries that modern classification tries to draw with clean lines. And yet DNA does not give everything back. It can suggest relationships, population size, mixing events, adaptations, and inherited traits. But it does not tell us the sound of Denisovan voices, the full shape of their faces, the names they may have used, the stories they carried, or what they thought when winter closed over the Altai. It cannot show how they taught a tool technique beside a hearth, how they chose a shelter, how they understood animals, or how they marked the difference between safe ground and dangerous ground. Genetic evidence is powerful, but it is not the same as a life. What survives in the record suggests a broad and complex population history, but no single explanation fully accounts for the full Denisovan world. The people themselves remain partly hidden behind the data that revealed them. Still, the discovery is profound because it proves how much of the Stone Age was invisible to older methods. Before ancient DNA, Denisovans were not missing because they were unimportant. They were missing because the surviving evidence was too small, too fragmentary, or too hard to classify. Their discovery warns us that other human stories may also lie just beyond the reach of current evidence. Some may be hidden in tropical bones without DNA. Some may be buried under drowned coastlines. Some may survive only as unusual patterns in living genomes. The Stone Age is therefore not a completed catalogue. It is an expanding mystery, where new techniques can turn an overlooked fragment into a lost people. In the end, the Denisovan discovery is a story about scale. A tiny piece of bone opens a continent. A sequence of ancient DNA changes the map of human movement. A genome found in a cave makes the Stone Age more crowded, more connected, and more uncertain. Before metal, humans and their relatives were already spreading, meeting, mixing, adapting, and leaving traces too small for the eye but not too small for time. The old stones still matter, lying patiently in the earth. But now, beside them, there is another archive, the broken code of vanished bodies, telling us that the human past was never as simple as the tools alone once made it seem. Once DNA opens the door, the human family stops looking like a simple line of ancestors walking steadily toward us. It becomes a crowded landscape of cousins. Some are close enough to recognize immediately as human in posture, hands, and tool use, yet distant enough that their faces, bodies, and histories follow paths of their own. For a long time, the easiest public story placed Homo sapiens at the center, with Neanderthals as the familiar neighboring species of Ice Age Europe and Western Asia. Denisovans complicate that picture from the East. They show that the Stone Age world was not a single stage occupied by one main actor, but a wide, shifting theatre where several human forms lived through overlapping ages, inherited different environments, and sometimes met after long separation. The deeper split comes far back in time. The ancestors of modern humans separate from the lineage that will eventually include Neanderthals and Denisovans. Then, later, Neanderthals and Denisovans separate from each other. That sounds neat when placed into a sentence, but the reality is almost certainly messier. Populations do not always divide like clean branches on a diagram. They spread, fragment, retreat, mix at edges, and survive in pockets. A valley can isolate a group for generations. A warming period can open a route. A cold pulse can push animals and people into new corridors. Over hundreds of thousands of years, these pressures create differences in bodies and genomes, yet they do not always create absolute walls. The evidence suggests separation, but also reunion. Ancient humans could become different without becoming completely unreachable to one another. Neanderthals are the best known of these relatives because their fossils are richer and their geography has been studied for longer. They live across Europe and parts of Western and Central Asia, enduring glacial landscapes, cold forests, open plains, and changing climates for hundreds of thousands of years. Their bodies are often described as powerful, compact, and adapted to cold, with broad trunks, strong limbs, and distinctive skull shapes. But even here, the familiar picture must be handled carefully. Neanderthals were not brute caricatures waiting to be replaced. They made tools, controlled fire, hunted large animals, used varied landscapes, and in some contexts engaged in behaviors that suggest symbolic or at least socially meaningful practices. Scholars still debate the full range and interpretation of Neanderthal culture, but the old image of a dull, failed human has not survived the evidence. Denisovans are harder to see. Compared with Neanderthals, they remain almost ghost-like. A few teeth, small bone fragments, a jaw from the Tibetan plateau linked by protein evidence, and genetic traces from caves and living populations give them shape without giving them a complete face. Yet their importance may be enormous. Their ancestry appears in modern human populations far from Siberia, especially in parts of Oceania and Asia, which implies that Denisovans, or Denisovan-related populations, range much more widely than the cave that named them. This does not mean one uniform Denisovan people occupied all of Asia in a simple way. More likely, What we call Denisovan ancestry may reflect several related populations spread across different regions, some deeply separated from each other. No single explanation fully accounts for the pattern, and the map remains unfinished. Modern humans, Homo sapiens, emerge in Africa, carrying their own long Stone Age inheritance. By the time some populations expand beyond Africa, they are already skilled toolmakers, fire users, foragers, travellers, and social learners. They do not step into an empty world. In Western Eurasia, they encounter Neanderthals. Farther east, or perhaps in multiple eastern and southern regions, they encounter Denisovan-related groups. These meetings are not necessarily dramatic in the way imagination prefers. They may not be sudden clashes at the edge of a glacier. They may be slow contacts along shared hunting grounds, river corridors, wooded margins, mountain routes, or coastal zones. Populations may avoid one another, observe one another, exchange partners, compete for resources, or simply pass through the same landscapes at different times. The genetic record preserves some meetings and loses countless others. The result is that the Stone Age becomes a story of mixture as well as movement. Many people alive today outside Africa carry small amounts of Neanderthal ancestry. Some carry Denisovan ancestry as well, with the highest proportions known in certain populations of Oceania and notable traces in parts of Asia. These inherited fragments are not merely curiosities. Some appear to have affected immunity, metabolism, and adaptation to local environments. The most famous case is a Denisovan-related genetic contribution associated with high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations, helping later humans live where oxygen is thin and ordinary lowland biology struggles. This is one of the most striking legacies of an extinct human group, a survival advantage in a harsh environment, passed across the boundary between ancient populations and carried into the present. But ancestry is not identity. A person today with Denisovan genetic fragments is not Denisovan in any cultural or species sense. The fragments are traces of ancient contact, scattered through genomes after thousands of generations of recombination. They are like embers from a fire that burned in another age, still warm enough to reveal that the fire existed, but not enough to reconstruct every movement around it. What survives in the record suggests that interbreeding occurred multiple times, in different places, and perhaps with different Denisovan-related populations. This makes the human past less like a replacement story and more like absorption, encounter, and inheritance. Some groups disappeared as distinct populations, but parts of them did not vanish completely. This is where the word species becomes both useful and troublesome. In living animals, species are often defined partly by reproductive separation, but human evolution refuses to fit the cleanest version of that rule. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens were distinct enough to show long, separate histories, yet close enough to leave descendants through interbreeding. Some scientists prefer to describe them as separate species. Others emphasize populations or subspecies within a broader human complex. The debate is not merely about names, it reflects a deeper uncertainty in the evidence. How different must two populations be before they are called separate species? How much mixing is enough to blur the boundary? The answer is not always obvious, especially when the people being classified left only bones, tools, and molecules. The complete Stone Age story grows stranger when other human relatives are added to the edges. Homo floresiensis, small-bodied and island-dwelling on Flores, survives until surprisingly late in Southeast Asia. Homo luzonensis in the Philippines adds another unexpected form from island Asia. Later Homo erectus or erectus-like populations may have persisted in some regions far longer than once assumed, though dates and classifications remain debated. These groups remind us that human diversity was not confined to a northern ice age drama. Tropical islands, high plateaus, monsoon forests, savannas, and coastlines all held their own experiments in survival. Some of those experiments left rich fossils, others left only questions. The common thread is adaptation before metal. None of these humans had bronze axes, iron knives, written maps, domesticated horses, or grain stores in the later agricultural sense, yet they endured. Their survival depended on bodies shaped by evolution and minds shaped by social learning. They learned stone, wood, bone, hide, fire, weather, animal movement, plant cycles, and the hidden geography of water and shelter. Each lineage carried its own version of this inheritance. Neanderthals mastered cold Western worlds. Denisovans or Denisovan-related groups seem to have moved through immense Asian distances and contributed adaptations to extreme altitude. Homo sapiens combined African origins with extraordinary dispersal, eventually reaching nearly every environment on Earth. Their differences matter, but so does the shared foundation. They were all Stone Age humans, solving the problem of life without metal. So the family picture is not a procession with us at the end, looking back at failed relatives. It is a night landscape lit by many fires. Some burn in caves, some under shelters, some near rivers, some on plains now buried or drowned. For a time, several fires burn at once. Smoke rises from different human worlds. Then, slowly, some flames disappear as distinct lineages fade, merge, or are overtaken by change. Homo sapiens remain, but not untouched. Inside the survivor, traces of others endure. The Stone Age is therefore not only the story of how our species survived, it is the story of how survival itself was shared, contested, inherited, and carried forward from relatives whose names were lost long before science found them again. The difficulty with Denisovans is that they are both unmistakably real and almost impossible to picture. Neanderthals can be reconstructed from skulls, ribs, limb bones, pelvises, and enough repeated evidence to make their bodies feel physically present. Homo sapiens leave faces, burials, footprints, ornaments, tools, and later art that gradually sharpen the outline of who they were. Denisovans, by contrast, remain suspended between genome and shadow. They have a name, a place of discovery, a genetic legacy, and a growing importance in the human story. Yet their bodies are still known from fragments so small that imagination rushes ahead faster than evidence allows. A tooth, a finger bone, a jaw, pieces sorted from cave material, traces in sediment from these. An entire population must be approached carefully, almost from the edges. The teeth are among the first clues that something unusual is being seen. Some Denisovan molars from Denisova Cave are large, robust, and not easily placed into the familiar range of Neanderthals or modern humans. Teeth are not glamorous fossils, but they are extraordinarily important. They preserve well. They carry genetic material under the right conditions, and their shape can reflect deep evolutionary history. A molar can outlast the face that once held it by hundreds of thousands of years. In Denisovans, the size and form of some teeth suggest a population that may have retained certain archaic features, though the evidence remains incomplete. A large tooth does not give a full body. It cannot tell us the expression of a face, the width of shoulders, the exact shape of a nose, or the rhythm of movement across a valley. but it does tell us that Denisovans were not merely invisible copies of Neanderthals living farther east. The jaw from the Tibetan plateau adds another piece, and a dramatic one. Found not in the Siberian cave that gave Denisovans their name, but high in a landscape of thin air and severe conditions, the mandible broadens the possible world of Denisovan-related people. It does not preserve ancient DNA in the usual way, but protein evidence links it to Denisovans, showing how new methods can extract identity from fossils that DNA alone cannot unlock. The jaw is robust, lacking a modern human chin, and it suggests a strong chewing apparatus. That detail may seem small, but in deep human history, jaws and teeth are tied to diet, development, ancestry, and adaptation. A face is not merely a face. It is a record of eating, breathing, growing, inheriting, and surviving. Still, scholars debate how much can be generalized from one mandible. It may represent one Denisovan-related population, not all Denisovans everywhere. This is the central caution. Denisovans may not have been a single uniform people with one appearance across Asia. The genetic evidence hints at deep diversity among Denisovan-related populations, perhaps separated by enormous distances and long spans of time. If so, asking what Denisovans looked like may be like asking what early Homo sapiens looked like across all of Africa and Eurasia, or what Neanderthals looked like across their entire range. There may not be one answer. Some Denisovan groups may have lived in cold northern regions, others in high-altitude plateaus, others perhaps closer to humid forests or island routes. Bodies shaped by different environments can vary, even within related populations. No single explanation fully accounts for the Denisovan pattern, because the fossil record is still too thin and the genetic record is uneven. Even so, certain inferences can be made with care. Denisovans were human relatives with bodies capable of enduring demanding environments, making or using Stone Age technologies, and surviving in regions where climate could be severe. They were likely strong by modern sedentary standards, not because they were mythical giants or superhumans, but because all mobile foragers live through bodily demands that industrial life mostly removes, walking long distances, carrying loads, processing tough materials, climbing slopes, digging, butchering, collecting fuel, shaping tools, and enduring cold or heat leave marks on bodies across a lifetime. But strength should not be confused with crudeness. The same body that breaks bone or drives a point into wood must also hold a small flake at the right angle, prepare bindings, control fire, and learn precise sequences of motion. Stone Age bodies are not only powerful, they are skilled. The temptation is to fill the gaps with fantasy. Popular images sometimes imagine Denisovans as massive, strange, almost monstrous figures, especially because some teeth and jaws seem robust. That is not justified. The evidence does not support turning them into giants, nor into a lost race of advanced beings, nor into a hidden civilization erased from history. Those ideas belong to speculation, not archaeology. What can be said is quieter and more interesting. Denisovans were part of the human family, distinct enough to carry their own genetic history, close enough to mix with Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, and widespread enough that their ancestry still appears far from the cave where they were first recognized. Their bodies were real, warm, vulnerable, adaptive, and mortal. The mystery is not that they were supernatural. The mystery is that they were ordinary once, and almost all of that ordinariness has vanished. To imagine them responsibly, it helps to begin not with faces but with actions. A Denisovan hand selects a stone nodule, a wrist turns it, feeling weight and fracture lines. A hammerstone strikes, a flake comes away. The motion requires anticipation where the blow lands, how the force travels, what edge will appear nearby. Fire changes the texture of food and the hardness of wood. A hide must be scraped clean. A point must be repaired. A path must be remembered. A dangerous slope must be crossed at the right time of day. These are bodily acts, and they tell us something anatomy alone cannot. Whatever Denisovans looked like, they lived through learned routines. Their identity was not only in genes or bones, it was in gestures repeated across generations until skill became inheritance. The broader Stone Age gives context for this. Early humans and their relatives are often reconstructed from skeletons, but their lives were lived through muscles, senses, and habits. A skull may suggest brain size, but it cannot alone reveal how attention moved across a landscape. A femur may show strength, but not the memory of a seasonal route. A hand bone may imply grip, but not the teaching of a technique. In the same way, Denisovan DNA tells us kinship, but not culture in full. Their physical identity is therefore both biological and behavioural, partly preserved and partly inferred. What survives in the record suggests people adapted to demanding worlds, but the evidence remains incomplete where it matters most for imagination. There is also the question of faces. Scientists can sometimes infer aspects of appearance from ancient DNA, and there have been attempts to reconstruct Denisovan traits through patterns of genetic regulation and comparison with other humans. These efforts are fascinating, but they must be treated as models, not portraits. A model can suggest possibilities, perhaps differences in skull shape, jaw form, dental development, or facial structure. It cannot give a photograph. It cannot restore skin weathered by wind, hair cut or tied in a practical way, scars from daily work, expression shaped by social life, or the subtle individuality that makes a person more than a specimen. The Denisovan face remains one of the great absences in human origins, and yet absence has its own force. Because we cannot see Denisovans clearly, they remind us how much of the Stone Age is built from partial evidence. The people before metal were not waiting to become visible to us. They lived fully in their own present and left only what chance allowed. Their bodies carried cold, hunger, strength, fatigue, skill, ancestry, and adaptation. Their teeth bit into food that no longer exists. Their feet crossed ground that may now be forest, desert, city, or seabed. Their bones returned to earth. A few fragments endured, and from those fragments science begins to recover not a complete portrait, but a presence. Denisovans remain barely visible, but they are no longer imaginary. They stand at the edge of the firelight, not as monsters, not as missing links, but as relatives whose bodies time has almost taken and whose traces still ask us to look more carefully. The lives of Stone Age people are easiest to misunderstand when viewed only through their most durable tools. A scraper in a museum case looks still, almost simple, as if it belongs to a quiet world of stone and bone, but in use, it belongs to movement. It belongs to a hide stretched tight, to hands working before daylight fails, to the smell of smoke and fat, to cold air pressing at the edge of a shelter, to hunger being delayed for one more day. A stone point is not only a weapon. A blade is not only a blade. Each object sits inside a chain of actions, finding the raw material, knowing how it breaks, shaping it without wasting too much, carrying it, repairing it, fitting it to wood or bone, using it until the edge dulls, then resharpening or discarding it where archaeologists may one day find it and mistake the remnant for the whole story. Before metal, daily life depends on an intimacy with materials that modern life rarely demands. Stone has personality. Some types fracture cleanly, producing sharp flakes with predictable edges. Others shatter badly, crumble, or break in stubborn ways. A skilled toolmaker does not simply pick up any rock. The hand tests weight, texture, shape, and hidden angles. A hammerstone strikes not with random force, but with controlled intention. Too soft a blow gives nothing useful. Too hard a blow ruins the core. The maker sees not only the stone as it is, but the tool that might be hidden inside it. That kind of vision is learned. It is practical imagination, passed through demonstration, correction, repetition, and long attention. What survives in the record suggests that many Stone Age communities carried these traditions across immense spans of time, but the exact ways people taught one another remain mostly beyond recovery. Fire sits at the centre of this world, yet not in the simple way old stories suggest. It is not merely a dramatic discovery, once made and then permanently possessed. Fire must be tended. It can die in rain, vanish in wind, consume fuel too quickly, fill a shelter with choking smoke, or attract attention when concealment matters. A group that controls fire must also control its consequences. Hearth placement matters. Ventilation matters. The choice of wood matters. Dry grass flares and disappears. Dense wood burns longer. Dung, peat, bone, and other fuels may matter in landscapes where trees are scarce. In cold places, fire protects sleep and makes survival possible during long nights. In warmer places, it cooks, clears, hardens, transforms, and gathers people into shared space. Around fire, raw food becomes softer and safer. Tough fibres loosen. Bones crack more easily for marrow. Wood can be hardened into points. Resin can be warmed into adhesive. The flame is not one invention. It is many inventions unfolding through use. Food is where the intelligence of the Stone Age becomes most visible, though not always most preserved. Meat leaves cut marks on bone and sometimes dramatic kill sites, so it attracts attention. But survival is rarely built on meat alone. Plants are vital, and plants are elusive in the archaeological record. Tubers, seeds, fruits, nuts, leaves, reeds, seaweed, and inner bark may vanish unless charred, trapped in dental calculus, preserved in unusual sediments, or detected through microscopic residues. A landscape that looks empty to outsiders can be full of food to people who know when to dig, when to wait, what to roast, what to soak, and what to avoid. Some foods are edible only after careful preparation. Some are seasonal gifts that must be gathered quickly. Some are fallback foods, eaten when preferred resources fail. Scholars still debate the exact balance of diet for many ancient groups, because the evidence remains incomplete. But the broad picture is clear. Stone Age survival depends on flexible eating, not on one heroic food source. Hunting, when it happens, requires more than courage. It requires knowledge of animal behavior, wind direction, terrain, tracks, fatigue, and timing. Large animals can feed many people, but they are also dangerous, unpredictable, and not always available. Smaller animals, fish, birds, shellfish, and trapped creatures may provide steadier returns in some environments. Coastal communities, where evidence survives, show how rich shorelines can be shellfish beds, fish runs, seabirds, marine mammals, edible plants, and driftwood. River margins offer another kind of abundance. The oldest popular image of Stone Age life often places people on open plains chasing mammoth, but much of survival probably happens in less cinematic ways, collecting shellfish at low tide, cracking nuts with a stone, digging roots with a wooden stick, smoking meat, drying fish, carrying water, repairing a net, scraping a hide until the hands ache. Shelter is just as varied. Caves preserve evidence, but most people do not spend most of human history living permanently in caves. Many caves are damp, smoky, dangerous, or poorly placed for daily needs. They can be useful shelters, workspaces, landmarks, ritual places, or seasonal refuges. But the wider Stone Age world includes shelters made from branches, hides, grass, bark, stones, bones, and earth. Some are temporary windbreaks. Some are repeatedly used camps. Some may be carefully arranged around hearths, work areas, sleeping spaces, and discard zones. The problem is preservation. A shelter of hide and wood may vanish almost completely, leaving only post holes, stone rings, burned patches, or nothing at all. Time favours caves not because caves were always more important, but because caves are better at keeping secrets. Clothing belongs to the same hidden world. In cold climates, survival without fitted covering is difficult, and in Ice Age environments it would have been impossible for many populations without some form of tailored or wrapped protection. Hides, furs, plant fibres, sinew, bone needles, awls, scrapers, and softening techniques become life-preserving technologies. Clothing is portable shelter. It carries warmth with the body. It protects feet, hands, and skin. It allows movement through seasons that would otherwise close the world, yet clothing almost never survives. Sometimes archaeologists find bone needles, hide-working tools, or impressions and residues that hint at what was once there. From those hints, an entire world of vanished craft must be inferred. No single explanation fully accounts for all regional variation, but the implication is unavoidable. Much of Stone Age technology was soft, flexible, perishable, and therefore nearly invisible. Social life holds these systems together. A lone person can make a tool, light a fire, or find food for a time, but long-term survival before metal is deeply social. Knowledge must move from mind to mind. A route to water must be remembered. A dangerous plant must be recognized. A stone source must be revisited. An injury must be endured with help. Food must often be shared because success is uneven. One day a hunter returns with meat. Another day gatherers bring the dependable calories. Another day fishing or scavenging or stored food carries the group through. The Stone Age is not merely a struggle of individuals against nature. It is an economy of attention, cooperation, obligation, and memory, even where the record cannot show emotion directly. Cared for bodies, repeated camps, complex tools, and long-distance movements suggest lives structured by relationship. This is also where Denisovans fit back into the larger human world. They were not merely genomes in cold sediment. Whatever their exact appearance, they too must have lived through daily tasks finding fuel, reading weather, locating stone, preparing food, moving through terrain, maintaining tools, and learning from others. If Denisovan-related people survived in high plateaus, forests, valleys, and perhaps far wider Asian landscapes, then their success depended on the same quiet foundation that sustained all Stone Age humans. Not mystery in the supernatural sense, but competence so ordinary that it rarely fossilizes. The astonishing thing is not that they possessed some impossible secret. It is that for hundreds of thousands of years, human relatives survived with technologies made from the world immediately around them, transforming stone, wood, bone, fire, fiber, and memory into a way of life. By the time metal finally appears in some regions, it does not replace ignorance with knowledge. It enters a world already rich in skill. The people before metal knew landscapes with a precision most later civilizations would lose. They could move through darkness, weather, hunger, and distance using traditions older than any written archive. Their lives were vulnerable, but not simple. Their tools were humble, but not crude. A sharpened stone edge, a controlled flame, a shelter of hide and branch, a remembered path to water, a shared meal beside smoke at dusk. These are the foundations on which every later human world rests. The Stone Age is not a blank before history. It is the long human apprenticeship in survival. The same skills that keep a small group alive beside a hearth also allow humans and their relatives to cross continents. A sharpened edge, a controlled flame, a remembered water source, and the ability to move with animals or seasons become more than daily tools. They become engines of expansion. In the Stone Age, Asia is not a corridor in the simple sense, not merely a route from one famous origin to one famous destination. It is a vast laboratory of survival, a continent of deserts that sometimes turn green, mountains that block and guide movement, forests that swallow traces, steppes that open like highways, rivers that carry life through dry regions, and coastlines that rise and vanish as ice ages pull water from the seas. To live across Asia before metal is to face not one world, but many worlds stitched together by climate. This is why the Denisovan mystery grows larger the moment it leaves Denisova Cave. The cave gives the name, but the genes point far beyond the Altai. Denisovan ancestry in some present-day populations implies encounters somewhere across a much wider Asian and Oceanian geography, perhaps involving related groups that were not all identical to the Siberian Denisovans. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate where those contacts happened. How many Denisovan-related populations existed, and how far they ranged? But the pattern is difficult to ignore. A people first recognized from a cave in southern Siberia have genetic echoes strongest in regions far to the southeast, across lands, islands, and ancient coastal routes. The map refuses to stay small. Asia during the Stone Age is especially difficult to reconstruct because the ground itself has changed. During glacial periods, sea levels fall as water becomes locked in ice. Continental shelves emerge, coastlines move outward, islands become connected to mainlands in some regions, while other crossings remain separated by deep channels. Then, as the climate warms, seas rise again and drown the very roots, camps, shorelines, and shellfish grounds that may have mattered most to migrating humans. This creates one of the great distortions in the record. Inland caves survive and attract excavation. Ancient coasts, where people may have found rich food and easier travel, often lie underwater. What survives in the record suggests movement, adaptation, and repeated expansion. But much of the evidence for coastal life has likely been taken by the sea. The continent's interior offers another kind of challenge. Central Asia can be a gate or a barrier depending on climate. In some periods, open steppe stretches across enormous distances, supporting grazing animals and the people who follow or intercept them. In other periods, cold, aridity, and ecological fragmentation make movement harder. Deserts such as the Gobi and Taklamakan are not fixed walls across all of prehistory. Their edges shift. Water appears and disappears. Lake basins fill and dry. Routes that seem impossible on a modern map may have opened during wetter intervals, while apparently easy paths may have closed during harsh phases. Early humans did not cross a static world. They crossed a breathing one. The mountains sharpened the problem. The Himalayas, the Tibetan Plateau, the Altai, the Tian Shan, the Pamirs, and countless lesser ranges create vertical worlds where altitude, cold, wind, and oxygen pressure transform survival. To modernize, high mountains can look like marginal places, but Stone Age people were often drawn to the edges of grassland and forest, valley and slope, river and plain, ice and open ground. Edges concentrate resources. Animals move along passes and valleys. Rivers begin in high places and carry life downward. Stone sources appear in exposed rock. The surprising evidence for Denisovan-related presence on the Tibetan Plateau makes this especially powerful. It suggests that archaic humans were not confined to comfortable lowlands. Some were capable of living, at least seasonally or repeatedly, in landscapes that demand biological and cultural adaptation at once. Farther south and east, the problem changes again. Forests preserve differently from cold caves. Humidity breaks down bone and DNA. Acidic soils erase what dry or frozen places might keep. Tropical and subtropical Asia may have been central to human movement, but it is often archaeologically quieter because time is harsher on organic remains there. This silence can mislead. A lack of abundant fossils does not mean a lack of people. It may mean that the environments most important for survival were the worst at preserving bodies. In monsoon regions, rivers shift, caves flood, soils churn, vegetation covers sites, and bones decay. The result is a continent where the northern cold sometimes speaks louder than the southern forests, not because the north was always more important, but because preservation gives it a stronger voice. Island Southeast Asia adds still another layer. Even when sea levels were lower, some deep water crossings remained. The presence of ancient humans and human relatives on islands such as Flores and Luzon shows that the Stone Age world included surprising movement beyond simple land walking, whether by accidental drifting, simple watercraft, planned crossings, or repeated near-shore voyaging. Early humans reached places that should make us cautious about underestimating them. The details remain debated, and no single explanation fully accounts for every island dispersal. But the fact of arrival matters. Before metal, before sails in the later historical sense, before maps, humans and their relatives were already pushing against water barriers. Their technologies may have been perishable, but their consequences were not. For Homo sapiens, Asia becomes a zone of extraordinary dispersal. Groups leaving Africa encounter Southwest Asia, then different routes open toward South Asia, Central Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and eventually Sahel, the ancient combined landmass of Australia and New Guinea during low sea levels. Along the way, they meet landscapes already shaped by other human populations. In some places, Neanderthal ancestry enters their family lines. Elsewhere, Denisovan ancestry does. These events do not have to be imagined as single dramatic meetings. They may have occurred through repeated contacts over long periods, at different frontiers, with different Denisovan-related groups. The genetic legacy that survives today may be the compressed result of many small human histories now impossible to separate completely. The tools carried and made across Asia also show adaptation rather than uniformity. Some regions preserve large cutting tools, others flake industries, blade technologies, microliths, grinding stones, bone tools, or composite implements. Raw materials vary, and so do needs. Bamboo, for example, may have been an important material in parts of Asia, but it almost never survives from deep time. This raises a strange possibility. Some Stone Age technologies may be underrepresented not because they were simple, but because they were made from materials that archaeology rarely keeps. In a bamboo-rich landscape, a sharp stone flake may be only the beginning of a toolkit that mostly vanished. The visible record may show the cutting edges while losing the baskets, spears, containers, mats, traps, handles, and shelters made from plants. Asia therefore teaches the most important lesson of the Stone Age survival is local, but intelligence travels. A group moving from open steppe into forest cannot simply use the old world unchanged. A group climbing toward high plateaus must solve cold and thin air. A group reaching monsoon coasts must learn tides, shellfish, storms, and mangrove edges. A group crossing dry interiors must know water and timing. These adaptations are not always visible as spectacular inventions. Often they are small shifts in practice, carrying different tools, changing camp locations, eating different foods, moving at different seasons, using fire differently, teaching new dangers to the next generation. Stone Age expansion is not a conquest of empty space. It is negotiation with living landscapes. And somewhere in that immense negotiation, Denisovans become both real and elusive. They are present in Siberian cave layers, hinted at on the Tibetan plateau, echoed in living genomes across distant regions, and yet still missing from many places where their story may have unfolded. Asia holds them like a broken reflection. Part of the image appears in cold caves, part appears in a high jaw, part appears in people alive today. Part may lie beneath drowned shorelines, tropical soils, or unexcavated valleys. The Stone Age continent is too large, too changeable, and too poorly preserved to give a clean answer. But it gives something better for understanding human survival, a map of possibility. Before metal, humans and their relatives did not merely endure one environment. They learned to become many kinds of human in many kinds of world. The farther the Stone Age story moves from the warmth of a hearth, the more obvious it becomes that survival is not only a matter of tools. A blade can cut, a fire can warm, a shelter can block wind. But the body itself must also endure. Cold enters through breath and skin. Thin air forces the lungs and heart to work harder. Long distances turn every possession into a calculation. A group that moves across steppe, mountain, or plateau cannot carry a city on its back. It carries knowledge. Small tools, fire-making skill, clothing, bindings, memory of water, and bodies slowly shaped by both inheritance and experience. Before metal, the first great human technologies are not separate from flesh. They are built around the limits of flesh. Cold is one of the oldest teachers. In glacial Eurasia, winter is not simply a season. It is a force that changes the meaning of every decision. Fuel must be found before night. Shelter must be chosen with wind in mind. Clothing must be repaired before it fails. Food must be acquired when animals move, when plants vanish beneath snow, when daylight shortens, and when mistakes become expensive. Neanderthals are often associated with cold adaptation, and their compact bodies may reflect long life in Ice Age conditions. But they were not the only humans who faced severe climates. Denisovans, at least in some regions, also lived in northern or high-altitude environments where cold and seasonality would have mattered. Homo sapiens later entered many of these worlds as well, carrying flexible cultural strategies that allowed them to survive from African grasslands to Arctic margins. One surprising thing about cold adaptation is how much of it may leave almost no trace. a fur garment, a sewn boot, a fitted hood, a windbreak of hides, a sleeping mat, a layer of grass under bedding, a carefully banked hearth. These can decide whether a group survives a freezing night, yet they rarely survive archaeologically. A stone scraper may remain, and from that scraper archaeologists infer hide working. A bone needle may remain, and from that needle they infer sewing. But the clothing itself is usually gone. This means the visible record can make Stone Age people appear less prepared than they were. The real technology may have wrapped the body, covered the hands, insulated the feet, and vanished completely. What survives in the record suggests that people were not simply enduring cold by toughness. They were engineering warmth with perishable materials. Altitude brings a different challenge. At high elevations, the air itself changes. Oxygen is thinner. The weather can shift quickly. Ultraviolet exposure intensifies, and growing seasons shorten. Living there is not just a cultural problem, but a biological one. The Tibetan Plateau is one of the most important landscapes in this part of the story because it preserves evidence that Denisovan-related people, or populations closely linked to them, were present in extreme highland environments long before modern cities, roads, or metal tools. The famous high-altitude genetic adaptation in many Tibetans associated with the EPAS1 region appears to have come from Denisovan-related ancestry. That does not mean Denisovans were mountain spirits or uniquely built for every high place. It means that an ancient genetic inheritance passed through contact between human populations later helped some Homo sapiens live more successfully in thin air. This is one of the deepest forms of legacy. A vanished population may disappear as a recognizable people, yet one part of its biology can become vital to another population's future. The Denisovan contribution to high-altitude adaptation is often described as a genetic gift, though that phrase should be used carefully. No one in the Stone Age planned such an inheritance. No one knew genes were being passed across deep time. The process was simply life groups met, had descendants, and some inherited variants proved useful under certain environmental pressures. Natural selection then favoured those variants in places where they helped. Scholars still debate the exact timing, roots, and population history behind this transfer, but the broad implication is powerful. Survival before metal was not only cultural and not only genetic, it was the entanglement of both. Distance adds a third pressure, quieter than cold or altitude, but just as important. Moving across Stone Age landscapes means balancing the need to travel with the burden of carrying. Every object has weight. A heavy stone tool may be useful, but if good stone is available ahead, it may be better to carry knowledge than material. If good stone is rare, a prepared core may be worth transporting. Fire may be carried as embers when possible, but if not, the skill to make it again becomes essential. Food can be carried only so far unless dried, smoked, stored, or naturally durable. Water is heavier than almost anything else a person needs. Distance turns planning into survival. A route is not just a line across land. It is a chain of resources that must appear in the right order. This is why Ice Age people often seem to move along ecological corridors rather than across random emptiness. River valleys, coastlines, lake margins, animal migration paths, mountain passes, and the edges between habitats all matter. These are places where food, water, stone, wood, shelter, and visibility come together. In Central and Northern Asia, a corridor might open during one climate phase and close in another, on exposed continental shelves. Coastal paths may exist for thousands of years and then drown when seas rise. In mountain regions, a pass may be useful only in certain seasons. The evidence remains incomplete, especially where ancient landscapes are now underwater or deeply buried, but the pattern suggests that movement was intelligent, flexible, and deeply tied to environmental reading. The adaptation to harsh places was never purely heroic. It was practical and repetitive. A group learns that one valley holds fuel when the uplands are bare. Another knows where animals descend during cold months. Another times movement to avoid the worst winds. Another uses caves as seasonal shelters but follows open country when herds move. Another stores knowledge of plants that remain edible when preferred foods fail. In high or cold regions, calories matter intensely. Warmth is energy. Movement costs energy, digestion, clothing, fire, shelter, and social sharing all become part of the same survival system. No single explanation fully accounts for how different Stone Age groups endured extreme environments, because the solutions varied by place, species, tradition, and climate. Denisovans sharpen this picture because they reveal that adaptation can be inherited across vanished boundaries. Neanderthals contributed immune-related variants to some later humans. Denisovans contributed variants that mattered in certain environments. Homo sapiens brought their own flexibility, symbolic systems, expanding networks, and technologies. The late Stone Age human world was not a sealed competition of isolated types. It was a shifting field of inherited advantages, local knowledge, and cultural improvisation. Some adaptations were carried in genes, others were carried in stories, gestures, and practiced hands. Many of the most important were probably carried in both body and behavior at once. Standing in imagination on a high plateau before metal, the lesson becomes clear. There is no bronze blade, no iron plough, no road, no written map. There is wind, stone, sky, animal movement, cold light, and a horizon that does not forgive carelessness. Yet humans and their relatives entered such places, learned them, and in some cases left traces that still shape life today. The Stone Age was not only an age of caves and forests, it was an age of altitude, ice, drought, distance, and return. It tested bodies, but it also tested memory. To survive harsh worlds, early humans had to become more than tool users. They had to become readers of Earth itself. A tool is never only an object. It is a decision made visible, the angle of a flake, the curve of a scraper, the polish on an edge, the scar pattern on a core, the residue caught in a crack. Each one records a moment when someone understood how a material could be persuaded to become useful. In the Stone Age, these moments accumulate into culture, but culture is harder to see than stone. A blade may survive. The lesson that taught the blade does not. A bead may survive. The meaning of wearing it may not. A hearth may survive. The words, gestures, rules, memories, and expectations around it are gone. Archaeology can reveal the hands of vanished people, but it cannot always tell us what those hands believed they were doing. Denisovans make this problem especially sharp, because their physical remains are so scarce. Researchers must ask whether certain tools, ornaments, or worked materials found in Denisova Cave and nearby contexts can be connected to them. The temptation is strong. A striking artifact appears in a layer. Genetic evidence shows Denisovans in the cave at some time. The imagination wants a direct line Denisovan maker, Denisovan culture, Denisovan mind. But cave layers are complicated. People return to the same shelters across thousands of years. Sediments shift. Later groups may leave material above or near earlier traces. Dating can be refined, revised, debated. A tool in the same cave as Denisovan DNA is not automatically a Denisovan tool. The evidence remains incomplete, and careful scholars know that the most exciting answer is not always the safest one. This uncertainty does not make the artifacts less interesting, it makes them more revealing. Stone tools in Denisova Cave and across the Altai show long use of the landscape by different human populations. Some tools are simple flakes, others more carefully prepared, and some reflect advanced planning in how cores were reduced and edges produced. The details matter because they show learned traditions, not random breaking. A person making a tool must imagine the next strike before making it. More complex techniques require a longer chain of anticipation. Prepare the core, shape the striking platform, remove flakes in sequence, preserve usable edges, avoid fatal mistakes. Whether the maker was Denisovan, Neanderthal, or Homo sapiens, the tool belongs to a world of teaching and inherited skill. The difficulty of assigning culture to a human type grows when similar tools appear across different populations. A scraper can be useful to everyone. A point can solve similar problems in different hands. A prepared core technique can spread, be reinvented, or be shared. Modern people often want each ancient group to have a signature style, like a flag or language. The Stone Age rarely cooperates so neatly. Technologies are shaped by raw material, task, tradition, mobility, and environment. If several human groups live in overlapping regions, they may produce similar objects because they face similar problems, or they may produce similar objects because ideas have moved between them. No single explanation fully accounts for every resemblance. There are also objects that seem to carry something beyond immediate survival. Denisova Cave has yielded ornaments and unusual worked materials, including items that have attracted attention because they suggest personal display, symbolic behavior, or long-distance connections. Among the most famous is a polished greenstone bracelet from the cave, often discussed because of its fine workmanship and early date. But this is where caution becomes necessary. The association between such artifacts and specific human populations can be difficult to establish. Some may belong to early Homo sapiens, some to other groups, and some remain debated. A beautiful object does not become Denisovan simply because it was found in the same famous cave. What survives in the record suggests complex behavior in the region, but the maker's identity may remain uncertain. Even with caution, ornaments change the atmosphere of the Stone Age. A pendant, bead, bracelet, pigment stain, or engraved piece of bone is not practical in the same way a scraper is practical. It may mark identity, memory, status, affiliation, beauty, ritual, or a shared idea that outsiders cannot decode. It may have been made for reasons that no longer translate into modern categories. A perforated object could be decoration, amulet, signal, gift, or something else entirely. Ochre may be used for hide working, adhesive recipes, skin decoration, symbolic marking, or multiple purposes at once. The same material can move between practical and meaningful worlds without a clean boundary. Stone Age people did not divide life into museum labels. A thing could be useful and meaningful at the same time. This matters for survival before metal. Culture is not an ornament added after basic needs are met. Culture is part of survival. The way a group makes tools, shares food, chooses camps, teaches the young, marks bodies, remembers dangers, and recognizes belonging can affect whether it endures. A symbolic object may seem less urgent than a spear point, but identity and trust matter deeply in mobile societies. A mark on the body, a shared style of ornament, or a familiar technique may help define who belongs, who teaches, who shares, who is recognized at a distance. Scholars still debate the meanings of many early symbolic objects, and some interpretations are speculative, but it is a mistake to imagine meaning as a luxury. Meaning can organize life. The silence around Denisovan culture therefore does not prove cultural emptiness. It proves that the evidence is hard to assign. Denisovans may have made tools from stone, wood, bone, and plant material, but only some stone and rare hard materials survive. They may have used pigments, ornaments, or symbolic practices, but without secure associations, we cannot speak with confidence. They may have had rich social traditions that left no durable trace at all, language itself, or some form of complex vocal communication is among the greatest missing pieces. Genetics and anatomy can suggest capacities, but no ancient voice fossilizes. Elsewhere in the Stone Age, the record of culture becomes more visible in Burst's cave paintings, engraved objects, beads, burials, musical instruments, patterned tools, and long-distance raw material movement. But these visible bursts should not be mistaken for the sudden invention of mind. They are the moments preservation and discovery allow us to see. Before them and beside them, there were likely countless perishable arts: body painting, hair arrangement, dance, story, fibre work, wood carving, temporary structures, and seasonal ceremonies that left little or nothing behind. The archaeological record is biased toward the hard, the burned, the buried, and the lucky. The human record was far larger. So the Stone Age becomes a study in disciplined imagination. Too little imagination turns ancient people into tool-making machines. Too much imagination turns them into myths, assigning meanings and powers not supported by evidence. The balance lies between them. A worked point shows skill, a bead suggests display, a transported stone hints at movement or exchange, a hearth shows repeated gathering, a genome reveals contact. Each clue opens a door, but not every door leads to certainty. The mystery of Denisovan culture remains not because they lacked culture, but because almost nothing that would have made them recognizable has survived with clear labels attached. At the edge of a Stone Age fire, this silence feels enormous. Someone lifts a tool, repairs an edge, warms resin, binds stone to wood, smooths a surface, perhaps threads a pendant, perhaps marks skin with pigment, perhaps teaches by gesture what cannot be recovered by excavation. Tens of thousands of years later, the fire is ash, the wood is gone, the voices are gone, the meanings are gone, a few stones remain, a tooth remains, a fragment of DNA remains. From them, science reconstructs a world. But the missing part must always be felt. Before metal, human life was not silent, only the record is. If tools and ornaments are difficult to assign to one human group, encounters are even harder to see. A meeting between ancient people rarely fossilizes. There is no preserved moment when two groups first notice one another across a valley. No durable record of caution, curiosity, avoidance, imitation, alliance, or misunderstanding. What remains is indirect a genome carrying ancestry from another population, a tool tradition appearing in a new place, a sudden overlap in cave layers, a shared landscape used at different times, a body whose inheritance crosses the boundary between names invented much later by scientists. In the Stone Age, contact is not a single event. It is a pressure that builds wherever ranges overlap, wherever rivers guide movement, wherever climate pushes people into the same refuges. and wherever survival draws different human groups toward the same water, stone, fuel, and animals. For a long time, it was tempting to imagine prehistoric encounters as simple replacement. One group arrives, another disappears, and the story moves forward. But DNA has made that version too thin. Neanderthals did not simply vanish without leaving traces. Denisovans did not disappear as though sealed behind a door. Homo sapiens did not move across Eurasia as untouched outsiders. The evidence now suggests a world of contact, however uneven and fragmented, where populations separated for long periods and then met again. Some of those meetings left descendants. Others may have left only borrowed techniques, altered routes, or no detectable trace at all. The evidence remains incomplete, but the clean walls once drawn between ancient human groups have become much more porous. Denisova Cave gives one of the clearest signs of this porosity. Among the most remarkable ancient individuals ever identified is a girl whose genome showed a Neanderthal mother and a Denisovan father. She is not important because she was unusual in being alive. She's important because she was unusually preserved and discovered. Her existence proves that contact between Neanderthals and Denisovans was not just theoretical. It happened close enough, recently enough in family terms, for one person to carry both lineages directly. That does not tell us how common such unions were, or what social circumstances surrounded them. Scholars still debate the scale and frequency of interbreeding among archaic humans, but the individual from Denisova Cave turns an abstract population diagram into something intimate. Two lineages that had spent hundreds of thousands of years apart could still meet in the same human world. These encounters likely unfolded in many ways. Some may have been brief contacts between small groups moving through the same territory. Others may have involved longer periods of living near one another, with repeated exchanges and shared knowledge. Some groups may have avoided each other most of the time, coming close only when resources concentrated in particular seasons. The Stone Age landscape encourages both separation and contact. Mountains divide, but passes connect. Rivers separate, but they also guide travel. Open steppe exposes movement across distance, while forests allow groups to remain near without seeing one another often. Climate change can compress populations into refuges during harsh phases, then spread them apart again when conditions improve. No single explanation fully accounts for every contact event, because each meeting would have depended on place, season, numbers, memory, and need. The arrival of Homo sapiens into Eurasia adds another layer to this older pattern. Modern humans moving beyond Africa encounter Neanderthals in western and central Eurasia, and Denisovan-related populations farther east or south. The genetic traces in living people suggest that these contacts happened more than once. They were not one neat episode at a single frontier. Instead, interbreeding seems to have occurred in different regions and times, producing ancestry that later spread, thinned, and recombined across generations. This makes the Late Stone Age less like a wave replacing everything before it, and more like a series of overlapping currents. Some currents disappear at the surface, but their water remains mixed into the river. The human consequences are difficult to reconstruct without turning speculation into story. Contact between groups could have brought opportunities and risks. A newcomer might know a better stone source, a seasonal route, a plant use, a hunting pattern, or a method for shaping a point. Another group might control a shelter, a pass, or a river crossing. Competition for resources was possible, especially in difficult climates, but it should not be imagined only through conflict. In small mobile populations, contact can also mean exchange, mating, observation, imitation, avoidance, and gradual absorption. The record does not allow every encounter to be described in emotional detail. What survives suggests that ancient humans were aware, adaptive, and socially complex enough for many outcomes. Technology may have moved across these boundaries, though proving it is difficult. When a tool style appears in a new region, archaeologists must ask whether people moved, ideas moved, or similar needs produced similar solutions independently. A stone technique can spread without a large migration. A group can learn from neighbours without leaving genetic evidence. A population can absorb another and preserve genes while losing visible cultural markers. Conversely, a distinctive artifact style may travel with a group whose biological ancestry later becomes hard to detect. Culture and biology do not always move together. This is one of the hidden contradictions of the Stone Age record. The most visible objects may not map cleanly onto the people who made them, while the most important human relationships may leave no distinctive objects at all. There is lesser-known possibility that makes this even more complicated. Some genetic studies suggest that Denisovans themselves were not a single shallow population, but a set of deeply diverged related groups. If Homo sapiens encountered different Denisovan-related populations in different parts of Asia, then the word Denisovan may be covering a wide family of Eastern archaic humans rather than one uniform people. That would help explain why ancestry patterns in living populations do not point easily back to one cave in Siberia. The cave named them because it preserved them, not necessarily because it was their centre. If this is true, then encounters with Denisovans were not one meeting with one lost people, but a series of contacts with related human worlds spread across a vast continent. The same pattern may apply to Neanderthals in a different way. Neanderthal populations were spread across broad regions and long times, and they too varied. Some groups lived near Western European coasts, others in colder interiors, others farther east. Their contacts with Homo sapiens likely differed by region. In some places, overlap may have been brief. In others, it may have lasted thousands of years. The evidence for symbolic behaviour, tool complexity, and ecological adaptation among Neanderthals makes it clear that modern humans were not encountering mindless relics. They were encountering another humanity, deeply rooted in Eurasia, with its own knowledge of animals, stone, fire, and terrain. For Homo sapiens, these encounters may have been transformative in ways both obvious and invisible. Genetic inheritance is one form. Certain archaic variants may have helped later humans respond to pathogens, climate, or altitude, though many inherited fragments may have been neutral or even disadvantageous, and later reduced by selection. Knowledge exchange is another possibility, harder to prove but plausible in some contexts. Even simple observation can matter. Seeing where another group finds water, how they move through a pass, or which stones they prefer may influence behaviour without any formal exchange. Stone Age learning does not require schools, it requires attention. Yet the story must remain grounded. There is no evidence for lost empires of Denisovans, no proof of advanced hidden civilizations, no reason to imagine ancient meetings as scenes from fantasy. The real mystery is subtler and more powerful. Several kinds of human, all without metal, all dependent on fragile social knowledge, shared the earth long enough to leave traces in one another. They were different, but not sealed apart. They were close enough to compete, close enough to learn, close enough to mix, and close enough that their histories cannot be separated cleanly after the fact. By the time only Homo sapiens remains as the last surviving human species, that survivor is already a mosaic. The people who disappear are not entirely outside the people who continue. So the Stone Age encounter is not a single dramatic confrontation at the edge of a cave. It is a long series of crossings of valleys, climates, territories, habits, and bodies. A Neanderthal fire burns in one shelter. A Denisovan group moves through another valley. Homo sapiens arrive with their own tools, memories, and roots. Sometimes the fires remain separate. Sometimes the smoke mingles. Time erases the faces, the voices, the meanings of those meetings. But DNA, stone, and scattered bones preserve enough to show that before metal, before cities, before written borders, human history was already a history of contact. The farther Denisovans are followed, the more they seem to dissolve into the landscape. In Siberia, they have a cave. On the Tibetan plateau, they have a jaw and proteins that tie them to high places. In the genomes of a living people, they have a scattered inheritance stretching toward East Asia, island Southeast Asia, New Guinea, Australia, and parts of Oceania. But between these points lies an immense silence. The map is not empty because nothing happened there. It is empty because bones decay. Coastlines drown, caves remain unexcavated, sediments are disturbed, and DNA survives only when chemistry, temperature, and luck allow it. Denisovans are therefore not just a lost human population. They are a test of how much prehistory can disappear while still leaving enough evidence to prove that it once filled vast spaces. The cave that named them sits in the Altai, but the strongest signals of Denisovan ancestry in living people are not found beside that cave. They appear far away, especially among some populations in Oceania and parts of island Southeast Asia, with lesser traces across parts of Asia. This creates a geographical puzzle. If the first identified Denisovans are from southern Siberia, why do their genetic echoes appear so strongly thousands of kilometers to the south and east? One answer is that Denisovans, or Denisovan-related groups, once occupied a much broader range than the fossils currently show. Another is that the population preserved in Denisova Cave was only one branch of a wider eastern archaic human world. Scholars still debate the details, but the genetic pattern makes one thing difficult to deny: the cave is not the whole story. It is only the place where the story survived well enough to be noticed. This is a common problem in Stone Age archaeology. The place of discovery can masquerade as the place of origin. A fossil is found in a cave, so the imagination makes the cave central. A tool tradition is first described in one region, so that region becomes its apparent home. But discovery is shaped by preservation, research history, politics, access, funding, erosion, mining, construction, and chance. Denisova Cave preserved ancient DNA in a way that many warmer places could not. It was excavated carefully enough for small fragments to matter. Its sediments kept a record that modern methods could read. That does not mean Denisovans were mainly Siberian cave dwellers. It means Siberia gave science a rare window, and windows should not be mistaken for the entire building. The Tibetan plateau widens that window dramatically. A Denisovan-linked jaw from a high-altitude setting suggests that related populations were present in environments far more severe than the cave alone might imply. Later evidence from highland sites has strengthened the idea that Denisovan-related people were able to use or inhabit plateau environments. This is surprising not because ancient humans were helpless, but because high altitude is genuinely difficult. Thin air, cold, intense sunlight, scarce fuel in some zones, and short growing seasons create a world where survival requires more than casual passage. Whether Denisovans lived there permanently, seasonally, or through repeated occupations remains debated. The evidence remains incomplete. but their connection to the plateau helps explain why a Denisovan-related genetic variant could later become important in Tibetan high-altitude adaptation. The biology and the geography seem to answer one another across time. Yet the plateau is only one part of the range mystery. Genetic evidence suggests that modern humans encountered Denisovan-related groups somewhere in eastern or southeastern regions as well, perhaps more than once. Some patterns point toward multiple pulses of Denisovan ancestry, rather than a single mixing event. That possibility matters because Asia is too large and varied for one simple Denisovan population to explain everything. There may have been northern Denisovans, plateau Denisovans, southeastern Denisovan-related groups, and others for whom no fossil has yet been found. They may have differed from one another as much as distant Neanderthal populations differed across Eurasia, or perhaps even more. The word Denisovan may be a convenient label placed over a set of related human histories that were never unified in life. If so, the missing fossils become less mysterious, though no less frustrating. Much of the likely range of Denisovan-related populations includes places hostile to preservation. Tropical forests break down bone. Humid caves can destroy DNA. Acid soils consume organic remains. Rivers move sediments and scatter contexts. Coastlines that once offered rich food and travel routes may now lie beneath the sea. Island Southeast Asia and Sahel, where Denisovan ancestry becomes especially important in later populations, were shaped by changing sea levels. During glacial periods, land masses expanded and coastlines shifted outward. During warming phases, the water returned and erased old living surfaces. Camps that may have held the clearest evidence of contact between Homo sapiens and Denisovan-related groups could now be submerged beyond ordinary excavation. This drowned geography is one of the great hidden chapters of the Stone Age. Modern coastlines are not ancient coastlines. People moving along Pleistocene shores may have followed beaches, estuaries, reefs, mangroves, river mouths, and shellfish beds that no longer exist above water. These places would have offered food, raw materials, and relatively easy movement compared with dense inland forests or high mountains. If ancient contact occurred near such coasts, the evidence may be lying under tens or hundreds of meters of water. What survives on land may be only the inland remnant of a much richer coastal story. No single explanation fully accounts for the missing Denisovan range, but submerged landscapes likely hold part of the answer. The fossil record of Asia is also crowded with difficult names and uncertain relationships. Some remains are clearly Homo sapiens, some are Neanderthal or Denisovan linked, others are archaic, mosaic, or debated. Teeth, jaws, skull fragments, and limb bones from China, Southeast Asia, and other regions sometimes show mixtures of features that do not fit comfortably into familiar categories. Some may represent Denisovan-related populations. Some may belong to other archaic humans. Some may be early modern humans with unusual traits. Without DNA or proteins, classification can be uncertain. With DNA, the picture may clarify, but many fossils are too old, too warm, or too chemically damaged to yield it. The result is a human landscape filled with possible Denisovan shadows but few definitive bodies. The same caution applies to tools. Across Asia, archaeologists find stone technologies that reflect skill, planning, and local adaptation. But tools rarely identify their makers by species. A flake industry in one region could be made by Homo sapiens, by another archaic population, or by groups whose biological identity remains unknown. The temptation to attach every mysterious Asian tool tradition to Denisovans is understandable, but it goes beyond the evidence. What can be said is that Denisovan-related people, wherever they lived, must have possessed workable Stone Age technologies suited to their environments. They did not cross mountains, forests, and plateaus by biology alone. They survived through tools, fire, food knowledge, shelter, and social learning, just as other human groups did. The mystery of Denisovan range therefore changes the scale of the entire Stone Age. It reveals that a human population can be genetically widespread and physically rare in the record. It shows that living genomes can preserve a vanished map long after fossils vanish from the ground. It warns that the human past of Asia is still underexplored compared with its importance, and it forces a humbler view of absence. When the bones are missing, the story is not necessarily missing. It may be underwater, dissolved in tropical soil, locked in unstudied cave sediment, or still waiting in a tooth small enough to be ignored. Somewhere beyond the Altai, beyond the plateau, beyond the known fragments. Denisovan-related groups must once have moved through landscapes we can barely reconstruct. They may have followed rivers now shifted, hunted or gathered along coasts now drowned, sheltered in caves not yet excavated, crossed forests where no bone survives, and met modern humans in places whose names will never be known. Their range is not a line on a map, but a set of clues scattered across geology, genetics, and chance. The Stone Age was larger than the places where it has been preserved. Denisovans remind us that human history can stretch across a continent and still leave only a handful of bones, a few molecules, and a living echo in the blood of people far from the cave where the lost population first came back into view. The Stone Age seems to disappear unevenly, almost unfairly. One cave preserves a tooth for tens of thousands of years. Another landscape, once full of camps, paths, shelters, meals, and voices, leaves nothing that can be recognized. A stone tool in dry sediment survives almost unchanged, while a wooden spear, a woven net, a hide cloak, a basket, a sleeping mat, and a lifetime of learned skill vanish completely. This unevenness is not a small problem at the edge of archaeology. It shapes the entire story. What modern people call the Stone Age is not the full world before metal. It is the portion of that world that time failed to erase. Bone itself is more fragile than it appears. A fossil in a museum case can look permanent, almost stone-like, but most bones never fossilize. They are eaten, scattered, weathered, dissolved, crushed, burned, washed away, or broken down by soil chemistry. For a human bone to survive from deep prehistory, many things must go right after death. It must be buried quickly enough, protected from scavengers and erosion, held in sediments with suitable chemistry, spared from later disturbance, and then found before it is destroyed by natural exposure or human activity. The deeper in time the story goes, the less likely this becomes. An entire group can live across a region for thousands of years and leave no recoverable skeletons at all. The absence feels dramatic, but it is often ordinary preservation failure. Teeth survive better, which is one reason Denisovans are known partly through them. Enamel is hard. It resists decay better than many bones. Teeth can preserve shape, wear, isotopes, proteins, and sometimes DNA. But teeth are small and easily separated from context. A single molar may tell us that someone existed. Perhaps that they belong to a particular lineage? Perhaps something about growth or diet, but it cannot restore a population by itself. The Denisovan record is built from just this kind of stubborn fragment, durable enough to survive, limited enough to frustrate. A tooth can hold an ancient world inside it, but only in compressed form. Climate is one of the great editors. Cold can preserve, dryness can preserve, stable caves can preserve, waterlogged. Oxygen-poor conditions can sometimes preserve wood, plant fibre, or even soft tissue. But heat and humidity are destructive. Tropical and subtropical regions, which may have been crucial to human movement and Denisovan-related ancestry, often destroy the very evidence needed to prove who lived there. DNA breaks apart faster in warmth. Bones dissolve in acidic soils. Forest floors recycle organic matter with ruthless efficiency. A cave in Siberia may hold genetic traces for tens of thousands of years, while an equally important site in Southeast Asia may surrender only stone tools and a few battered teeth, or nothing at all. This does not mean northern lives mattered more. It means northern evidence sometimes lasts longer. The result is a distorted map of ancient humanity. Europe and parts of Western Asia are better represented partly because they have long histories of excavation, and partly because some environments preserve bone and DNA well. Africa holds the deepest origins of humanity, but its varied climates and vast landscapes preserve unevenly. Asia is enormous, archaeologically complex, and in many regions still underrepresented in global narratives. Island and coastal worlds are even more difficult because rising seas have drowned ancient shorelines. The places where people may have eaten shellfish, repaired tools, watched tides, launched simple watercraft, gathered plants, and met other human groups may now lie beneath the ocean. If the most important evidence is underwater, the land record becomes a broken mirror. Excavation history adds another distortion. Archaeology does not happen everywhere equally. Sites are discovered because roads are cut, quarries open, caves are explored, farmers find bones, construction exposes sediments, researchers choose survey areas, governments fund projects, and political conditions allow work. Some regions are intensively studied for generations. Others remain difficult to access, poorly funded, dangerous, forested, urbanized, or simply overlooked. The human past is therefore shaped not only by ancient behavior, but by modern opportunity. A fossil found in one place may become famous because it was found early, studied often, and placed at the center of a scholarly tradition. Another fossil may remain unknown because it lies in a drawer, a remote cave, a private collection, or a sediment layer no one has yet opened. What survives in the record is never only what existed, it is what existed, endured, was exposed, recognized, and interpreted. Recognition is another fragile step. A small bone fragment may not look human. A tooth may be misclassified. A stone tool may be mistaken for natural breakage or ignored because it does not fit expected patterns. In the past, many tiny fragments were not sampled for DNA because no one imagined they could reveal an unknown population. Denisovans were found partly because science had become capable of reading clues that earlier generations could not. This raises a quiet and unsettling possibility. Museums and excavation collections may already hold pieces of lost human groups that have not yet been identified. The evidence remains incomplete not only because the ground is incomplete, but because our methods are still changing. Ancient DNA has transformed this situation, but it also has limits. It requires preservation, careful handling, and enough surviving material to distinguish ancient signal from contamination. It works best in certain environments and less well in others. It can identify relationships with astonishing precision, but it cannot be extracted from every fossil, and it cannot answer every cultural question. Proteins can sometimes survive where DNA fails, offering another route to identification. as in Denisovan-linked material from the Tibetan Plateau. Sediment DNA can reveal presence without visible bones. Zooarchaeology by mass spectrometry can sort tiny bone fragments by protein signatures. These methods are changing the Stone Age, but they also remind us how much earlier evidence must have passed unnoticed. The past did not become complex only when science improved. Science merely began to detect the complexity that had always been there. The invisibility of perishable technology may be the greatest loss of all. Stone tools dominate because they survive, but Stone Age life depended heavily on wood, fibre, hide, bark, sinew, resin, feathers, grasses, reeds, and plant materials. In many environments, these may have been more common in daily use than formal stone tools. A sharpened wooden digging stick can open the ground for tubers. A spear shaft carries the stone point. A basket carries gathered food. A cord binds shelter poles. A net catches fish or small animals. A mat insulates against cold ground. A container carries water or embers. A handle makes a blade safer and stronger. Lose these materials, and the Stone Age appears harder, barer, and more primitive than it was. Time strips away the soft technologies and leaves the hard edges. This loss affects Denisovans directly. If Denisovan-related people lived in forested or tropical regions, they may have used bamboo, wood, vines, fibres, resins, hides, and other perishable materials extensively. Bamboo in particular can be cut, split, sharpened, shaped, and used for many purposes, but it almost never survives from deep time. A community could possess a rich organic toolkit and leave behind only the stone flakes used to manufacture it. Later, archaeologists might see a sparse stone record and underestimate the complexity of the actual technology. No single explanation fully accounts for the archaeological silence around Denisovans, but perishable material is almost certainly part of it. Even human bodies can be culturally invisible after death. Not every society leaves formal burials. Some bodies may have been exposed, cremated, placed in landscapes where preservation was poor, moved by animals, or buried in shallow places later destroyed. Some practices may leave almost no trace. This is especially important when comparing groups. A population that commonly used caves may be more visible than one that lived mostly in open-air shelters. A group whose dead happened to enter preserving sediments may seem larger or more important than one whose dead vanished in acidic ground. The record of death does not perfectly measure the reality of life. The Stone Age also suffers from the vastness of time. 1,000 years can collapse into one layer. 10,000 years can be represented by a handful of artifacts. A cave may be used repeatedly by different groups, with gaps between occupations, disturbances by animals, sediment movement, freezing and thawing, water flow, or later human activity. Dating methods are powerful, but they come with ranges, uncertainties, and context that must be interpreted carefully. When archaeologists speak about a layer or a population, they may be dealing with evidence accumulated over periods longer than many later civilizations lasted. The scale itself blurs human detail. A life becomes a fragment. A generation becomes a deposit. A population becomes a genetic signal. This is why entire human lineages can almost vanish from the physical record. It does not require a conspiracy of mystery, only the ordinary violence of time. Bodies decay, wood rots, coasts drown, caves collapse, rivers cut through sites, glaciers grind landscapes, deserts bury camps under moving sand, forests consume bones. Later, humans build, mine, plough, and destroy without knowing what lies below. The surprise is not that so little survives. The surprise is that anything survives at all. And yet, from this damaged record, a powerful picture still emerges. Before metal, humans and their relatives lived in landscapes far more varied than the surviving evidence suggests. They made tools from materials that vanished, moved through routes now lost, and belonged to populations whose names are modern inventions placed over ancient lives. Denisovans remind us of the scale of the missing world. They were real enough to leave descendants, adaptive enough to matter across Asia, distinct enough to be identified by DNA, and fragile enough in the fossil record to nearly disappear. Their near invisibility is not an exception, it is a warning. The Stone Age is full of people who are not absent from history because they failed to live, but because time was better at erasing them than we are at finding them. Disappearance is one of the most misleading words in prehistory. It sounds clean, as if a people step to the edge of time and vanish all at once. But ancient populations rarely end that way. They thin, move, merge, retreat, adapt, fail in some regions and continue in others, leave descendants under different names, or become invisible because the evidence no longer preserves them. For Denisovans, this problem is especially difficult because they are already difficult to see while they are alive in the record. There is no final Denisovan city burned into history, no last written line, no battlefield, no monument, no remembered homeland. There are fragments, genomes, sediment traces, and living inheritance. Their ending is not a door closing. It is a fog spreading over a landscape that was never fully visible in the first place. Climate is one possible part of the answer. The late Pleistocene world is unstable, shaped by glacial cycles, abrupt warming and cooling, shifting rainfall, expanding grasslands, retreating forests, changing coastlines, and animals moving with the habitats they depend on. A population adapted to one pattern of resources may find itself under pressure when the pattern changes. Cold may intensify, dryness may reduce plant foods and water sources, forest corridors may break apart, herd routes may shift beyond familiar ranges, sea levels may rise and drown coastal territories that once supported movement and contact. In high-altitude regions, small changes in climate can alter the availability of fuel, animals, and seasonal shelter. None of this needs to produce a dramatic instant collapse. A few difficult generations can reduce numbers, separate groups, and make recovery harder. For small populations, ordinary hardship can become historical disappearance. But climate alone is probably too simple. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and Homo sapiens all lived through severe environmental change. Some groups survived harsh swings for long periods. The question is not whether climate mattered, but how it interacted with population size, geography, food, mobility, and contact with others. Denisovan-related groups may have been spread across enormous regions, but perhaps in low densities, broken into isolated populations by mountains, forests, deserts, and changing climates. Isolation can preserve difference for a time, but it can also make groups vulnerable. If numbers are small and contacts between communities become rare, a bad sequence of seasons, disease, resource stress, or reduced mating networks can have lasting effects. The evidence remains incomplete, but population fragmentation may be one of the quiet forces behind many Stone Age endings. Competition with Homo sapiens is often mentioned, and it may have played a role, but it should not be imagined too narrowly. Competition does not always mean direct conflict. It can mean two groups needing the same valleys, the same shelters, the same water sources, the same stone outcrops, or the same animal migrations. It can mean one population expanding faster, connecting over wider networks, using resources more flexibly, or recovering more easily after local losses. Homo sapiens may have had advantages in social networks, symbolic communication, long-distance exchange, adaptable toolkits, or demographic growth, though scholars still debate how decisive each factor was. No single explanation fully accounts for why Homo sapiens remained while other human lineages disappeared as distinct groups. The answer likely differs by region. Absorption may be the most subtle ending of all. Denisovans did not vanish completely if parts of their ancestry continue in living people. In that sense, some Denisovan lineages were not extinguished. They were folded into expanding Homo sapiens populations. A small Denisovan-related group meeting a larger modern human population might, over generations, contribute ancestry while losing its separate identity. Children would grow within communities shaped increasingly by Homo sapiens numbers, languages, habits, and technologies, while still carrying fragments of Denisovan inheritance. After enough time, the visible population boundary would disappear, but the genes would remain. This kind of ending leaves no dramatic ruin. It leaves a mosaic. The same may have happened more than once, in different places. Genetic evidence suggests multiple contacts between modern humans and Denisovan-related populations, possibly involving groups that were themselves deeply diverged from one another. If so, there was not one Denisovan disappearance. There were many local endings. A northern population may have faded under climate and demographic pressure. A plateau population may have been absorbed or replaced after contributing useful high-altitude variants. A southeastern population may have mixed with incoming modern humans along routes now drowned or archaeologically silent. Another group may have persisted longer in some refuge, leaving no fossil yet found. What survives in the record suggests a pattern of gradual erosion rather than one final catastrophe. Disease is another possibility, though harder to prove. When populations meet after long separation, they may carry different pathogens or immune histories. Some genetic contributions from archaic humans to modern humans appear connected to immunity, which hints that disease pressures mattered in ancient encounters. But specific outbreaks are almost impossible to reconstruct for Denisovans. The Stone Age has no medical records, no written accounts, no named epidemics. Ancient DNA may someday reveal more about pathogens in prehistoric remains, but for now disease remains plausible rather than clearly demonstrated. It belongs among the pressures that could weaken small populations, not as a complete answer by itself. Technology may also have mattered, though not in the crude sense that one group had intelligence and another did not. Denisovans survived for a long time with effective Stone Age skills. Neanderthals did too. The issue may have been the scale and flexibility of cultural networks. Homo sapiens populations in some regions appear to have developed increasingly elaborate symbolic systems, wider exchange networks, more varied toolkits, and perhaps broader alliances. A group connected to distant communities can survive local failure better than a group isolated in smaller pockets. Knowledge, partners, raw materials, and help can travel farther. In prehistory, connection can be a survival technology. If Denisovan-related populations were more fragmented, they may have been less able to rebound from stress, even if their local knowledge was deep. There is also the possibility that some Denisovan endings are invisible because they happened before Homo sapiens arrived in certain regions. A population can disappear from one area due to climate or ecological change, while related groups continue elsewhere. Later contact with modern humans may involve only the surviving branches. This would make the Denisovan story look like a single decline, when it was actually a long sequence of expansions, isolations, local extinctions, and absorptions. The name Denisovan compresses too much time and geography into one word. It gives the illusion of unity where there may have been a scattered world of related people with different fates. The final disappearance of distinct Denisovan populations, then, was probably not one event. It was a process. It may have included climate stress in some places, competition in others, low population density, isolation, disease, resource shifts, and repeated absorption into Homo sapiens. The mystery remains because the evidence is thin where it matters most. We do not know the last valley where Denisovan-related people lived as a recognizable group. We do not know the last generation that carried mostly Denisovan ancestry. We do not know whether the final communities understood themselves as separate from neighboring humans, or whether the boundaries were already blurred beyond recognition. What can be said is that disappearance did not mean emptiness. The world after Denisovans was not free of them. Their bodies vanished from the visible record, but their genetic traces endured. Their adaptations, shaped by landscapes before metal, entered the inheritance of later people. Their story became part of ours, not through memory, but through biology. Somewhere in the immense Stone Age, fires once burned for people whose faces we cannot restore. Their tools dulled, their shelters fell. Their names, if they had names, were lost. But the ending was not absolute, like embers buried beneath ash. A faint Denisovan warmth remained, carried forward in living bodies long after the people themselves had slipped beyond the reach of sight. The strangest Denisovan fossils are not in caves. They are alive. They move through cities, villages, high valleys, islands, coastlines, and families who do not look like vanished archaic humans, do not speak their languages, do not carry their memories, and yet still hold small fragments of their inheritance. This is one of the most unsettling discoveries of modern genetics. Disappearance is not always the same as erasure. A people can vanish as a visible population, their bones almost gone, their tools uncertain, their faces unknown, and still leave pieces of themselves inside descendants of those who met them. Denisovans are not alive as Denisovans, but Denisovan ancestry has not entirely left the world. The pattern is uneven. Some people today carry little or no detectable Denisovan ancestry. Others carry small amounts. In certain populations of Oceania, including parts of New Guinea and nearby regions, Denisovan ancestry reaches some of the highest known levels. Traces also appear in parts of East Asia, Southeast Asia, South Asia, and among populations connected to high-altitude regions such as Tibet. The distribution is not simple, and it does not point neatly back to one cave in Siberia. Instead, it suggests repeated ancient contacts, probably with Denisovan-related populations spread across different parts of Asia. The evidence remains incomplete, but the living genome has become a map of encounters that archaeology has not yet fully found in the ground. This does not mean that modern people with Denisovan ancestry are living Denisovans. That mistake should be avoided. Genetic inheritance becomes diluted, rearranged, and recombined across thousands of generations. A small Denisovan-derived segment in a modern genome is not a preserved ancient identity. It is a trace of contact, a surviving splinter from a much larger human story. Culture, language, memory, and community do not pass through DNA in any simple way. A person does not inherit a Denisovan song, tool method, or landscape memory from a gene segment. What is inherited is biological material, and even that material has been shaped by long histories of selection, chance, migration, and population change. Still, some of those fragments mattered. The most famous example is high-altitude adaptation in Tibetan populations. Many Tibetans carry a version of a genetic region associated with the body's response to low oxygen, and this version appears to have entered the ancestors of modern humans through Denisovan-related ancestry. In the thin air of the Tibetan plateau, where oxygen is scarce, and the body must solve a quiet crisis with every breath, such inheritance could become deeply important. It is not the whole story of highland survival, because culture matters too. Clothing, shelter, food systems, movement patterns, fuel use, animal management in later periods, and social knowledge all shape life at altitude. But the Denisovan-linked genetic contribution shows that a vanished population helped provide one biological answer to an extreme environment. This is survival across a boundary. Denisovan-related people endured high places long before modern nations, written maps, or metal tools. Later, when Homo sapiens populations lived and adapted there, part of the archaic inheritance proved useful. Natural selection did not preserve the memory of Denisovans out of respect for the past. It preserved variants that helped living people in a particular environment. There is something almost austere in that. The genome has no sentiment. Yet through its blind filtering, it carried a trace of a vanished people into one of the hardest inhabited landscapes on Earth. The Denisovans disappeared as a named population long before anyone named them, but one part of their adaptation remained where the air itself made it valuable. Other Denisovan-derived genetic fragments may have influenced immune responses, metabolism, fat processing, or adaptation to local environments, though the details are complex and scholars still debate the function of many segments. Some inherited archaic variants may have been beneficial, others may have been neutral, some may have been harmful and reduced over time by natural selection. A genetic legacy is not a collection of heroic upgrades. It is a messy inheritance from real populations, filtered through environment and chance. The important point is not that Denisovans made modern humans superior in some simple way. The important point is that modern human survival was, in some regions, partly built from contact with other humans. This reshapes the older story of Homo sapiens. The last surviving human species is not pure in the mythic sense that older narratives sometimes implied. It is a survivor carrying fragments of relatives. Outside Africa, many people carry Neanderthal ancestry. In some regions, people also carry Denisovan ancestry. The amounts vary, and the history behind them is complicated, but the message is clear. The expansion of Homo sapiens was not only replacement, it was also absorption. The human species that remains is, in part, a mosaic formed by movement, encounter, and inheritance. The Stone Age was not a clean contest won by one isolated lineage. It was a long entanglement, and the survivor still bears marks of the entangled world. There is a quiet irony here. Denisovans are far better known genetically than physically. We can sometimes identify where their DNA persists, but we cannot confidently describe their full appearance. We can trace fragments of their ancestry through populations, but we cannot reconstruct their languages, social rules, or ordinary days. We can say that their legacy appears in living people, but not what they called themselves, not how they understood kinship, not how they marked belonging, not what stories they told beside fire. What survives in the record suggests influence without memory. The body remembers what culture forgot. For people living today, this legacy can feel both intimate and distant. It is intimate because DNA is inside the body, not locked behind museum glass. It is distant because the ancestry comes from meetings so ancient that no direct tradition can reach them. The Denisovan trace does not belong to one modern nation, one legend, one simple migration story, or one identity claim. It belongs to deep time. It belongs to a period when human groups moved through landscapes that have since changed beyond recognition, when coastlines were farther away, when ice locked up seas, when forests shifted, when other humans still existed, and when the boundaries later drawn by history had no meaning. The living legacy also reminds us that extinction can be partial. A lineage may end as a separate population, but parts of it can continue inside another. This is not the same as survival in the full human sense. Denisovan communities, if they had distinct languages, traditions, and ways of life, are gone. Their social worlds did not continue intact. Their disappearance remains real. But biology complicates the finality. Their genes crossed into other populations and travelled onward. They became hidden passengers in the long journey of Homo sapiens, surfacing now through sequencing machines, statistical models, and comparisons between ancient and modern genomes. In the complete Stone Age story, this is one of the deepest lessons. Humans survived before metal not as a single untouched stream, but through contact, flexibility, borrowing, mixing, and adaptation. Stone tools carried practical knowledge, fire carried warmth, social life carried memory, genes carried older experiments in survival, sometimes from populations that would later vanish. The body of modern humanity is therefore not a monument to isolation. It is an archive of encounters. Somewhere far back in the Pleistocene, two groups meet. The landscape may be a cold valley, a high plateau, a forest edge, a river corridor, or a coast now drowned beneath the sea. Nothing about the moment is recorded in words. No one knows it will matter thousands of generations later. Yet descendants are born, and among the countless pieces of inheritance passed forward, a few Denisovan fragments remain. Most are lost. Some persist, in certain places, under certain pressures. One becomes useful. Long after the people themselves disappear from sight, their legacy continues quietly, not as a story remembered, but as a breath drawn more easily in thin mountain air, as a pattern hidden in blood, as a reminder that the Stone Age is not entirely behind us. Part of it is still carried within. By the end of the Stone Age, the world has already been changed by humans for an almost unimaginable length of time. Not by cities, not by metal armies, not by written laws or monuments, but by small fires, repeated footsteps, sharpened stones, remembered routes, altered landscapes, and the steady pressure of survival. Long before bronze shines in a furnace, human beings and their relatives have crossed deserts, entered forests, climbed plateaus, reached islands, followed rivers, endured ice, painted walls, shaped bone, carved wood, buried meaning into objects, and carried knowledge across generations without writing down a single word. The Stone Age is therefore not a primitive beginning waiting for real history to arrive. It is the vast foundation under everything that follows. Denisovans make that foundation harder to simplify. They show that the human past was not one species alone improving in a straight line until civilization appeared. It was a world of several humanities, each carrying its own inheritance of body, landscape, and skill. Neanderthals mastered cold Western Eurasian worlds. Denisovan-related groups seem to have ranged across immense and varied parts of Asia, from Siberian caves to high plateaus and perhaps far beyond. Homo sapiens emerged from Africa with a deep Stone Age tradition of their own, then moved into lands already inhabited by others. Some groups vanished as separate peoples, Some were absorbed, some left genes, tools, or uncertain traces. What survives in the record suggests that before metal, humanity was already plural, unstable, adaptive, and deeply connected. The complete Stone Age story is also the story of invisible technology. The surviving stones can mislead by their durability. They make the age appear harder and barer than it was. But the people of this long world likely lived among materials that archaeology rarely recovers: wooden shafts, hide shelters, cords, baskets, nets, mats, handles, bindings, water containers, plant medicines, pigments, resins, and clothing shaped by need. A stone flake may be the only remnant of an entire vanished craft system. A scraper may stand in for winter clothing. A point may stand in for woodworking, adhesive preparation, social teaching, and a long chain of decisions. The record is not wrong, but it is incomplete. It shows the bones of technology after the flesh has disappeared. Across millions of years, toolmaking itself changes. Early flakes open new foods and new possibilities. Hand axes show symmetry, planning, and repeated tradition. Prepared core techniques reveal minds capable of imagining a sequence before it happens. Blades, points, microliths, grinding stones, bone tools, and composite weapons later expand the range of human action. But the Stone Age is not simply a parade of better objects. A simple tool in the right hand, used in the right landscape, may be more important than an elaborate tool in the wrong one. Survival depends on fit tool to material, body to climate, group to landscape, memory to season. Progress is not always a straight road. Sometimes it is a return to what works. Fire may be the closest thing to a central thread. It appears again and again as warmth, protection, cooking, gathering place, workshop, and symbol of continuity. Fire allows people to live differently at night. It changes diets. It changes social time. It hardens wood, transforms materials, and makes cold worlds more survivable. Yet fire too is a relationship, not a possession. It must be made, carried, guarded, fed, and understood. A hearth is one of the most human marks in the archaeological record because it implies not only heat, but return. Around it, tools are repaired, food is shared, bodies rest, and knowledge moves without writing. Then, slowly and unevenly, the later Stone Age begins to shift toward farming in some parts of the world. The change is not a single revolution everywhere at once. In different regions, people begin managing plants, harvesting wild grains, domesticating animals, settling longer in favoured places, storing food, polishing stone axes, clearing land, and building more permanent structures. Agriculture creates new possibilities, but also new burdens, harder labour in some contexts. Disease risks from crowded life, dependence on fewer foods, property, conflict over land, and deeper social inequality in many later societies. Foragers do not simply become farmers because farming is obviously superior. The transition is debated, regional, and complex. No single explanation fully accounts for why some groups adopted agriculture, while others continued hunting, gathering, fishing, and herding in different ways. The arrival of farming does not end the Stone Age everywhere. It transforms some worlds while others remain mobile, mixed, or resistant to agriculture for thousands of years. Even after metal appears, stone remains useful. Flint knives, grinding stones, arrowheads, axes, and everyday tools continue in many places because good technology does not vanish simply because a new material exists. Metal changes power, production, warfare, trade, and status. But it does not erase the old knowledge immediately. Much of human life still rests on Stone Age foundations: how to read weather, how to make shelter, how to share food, how to teach, how to remember danger, how to cooperate when certainty fails. This is why the Stone Age matters so deeply. It is the long period in which humans learn that survival is never one skill. It is a braid of many skills. Biology matters, as Denisovan high-altitude ancestry shows. Culture matters, as tools, fire, clothing, and food knowledge show. Environment matters, because every landscape offers different problems. Social life matters, because knowledge dies when it cannot be carried forward. Chance matters too, because a group may survive or fail because a climate shifts, a route closes, a coastline drowns, a population becomes isolated, or a meeting with another group changes everything. The mystery is not only what vanished. The mystery is how much endured. For millions of years, human relatives survived without metal in worlds that could change violently and without warning. They faced ice ages, droughts, predators, hunger, injuries, migrations, and the loss of familiar places. They did not know they were building the foundation for later history. They were simply trying to remain alive. Yet from their attempts came the habits that still define humanity: making, teaching, adapting, imagining, remembering, and gathering around shared light. Denisovans, nearly lost and then recovered through DNA, stand as a symbol of the hidden Stone Age. They remind us that whole peoples can disappear from sight while still shaping the future. They remind us that the human story is not only written in monuments, but in fragments, sediments, genes, and tools small enough to fit in a hand. They remind us that the past is not always beneath us in a straight line. Sometimes it is inside us, scattered and faint, waiting for science to recognize what time almost erased. The complete Stone Age story ends without truly ending. It flows into farming, villages, metals, cities, writing, kingdoms, and the noisy record of history. But beneath those later worlds is the older one: stone struck against stone, fire protected against darkness, bodies moving across uncertain land, memory carried from one generation to another. Before metal, humans survived because they were never only one thing. They were toolmakers and listeners, wanderers and returners, hunters and gatherers, inventors and inheritors. They belong to many lineages, many climates, many landscapes, and many unfinished experiments. The Stone Age was not the waiting room of civilization. It was the age in which humanity learned, slowly and painfully, how to endure. The last image is not a city rising or a king crowned, or a blade of bronze cooling in a mould. It is smaller than that, and older. A fire burns low at the edge of a shelter. Beyond it, the land is dark, alive with wind, animal movement, and the quiet uncertainty of another night before history has a name. Around that fire, people rest with tools close to hand. Some of what they know came from their own lives. Some came from those before them. Some may have come, in ways they could never understand, from other human groups whose traces would one day become mysteries. Nothing in that moment is guaranteed. The fire must be kept. The weather must be watched. The path tomorrow must be chosen well. The world is not gentle, and yet it is not empty of kindness either. There is shared warmth. There is food divided. There is knowledge given without writing. There is the old human habit of making a small circle of safety inside a vast and changing earth. Over time, the shelter falls, the wood rots, the clothing disappears, the names vanish first, then the stories, then the bodies. Stone remains, a tooth remains, a trace of ash remains. A few fragments of DNA survive in cold ground, or in living people thousands of generations later. From these remnants, the Stone Age returns, not as a simple age of darkness, but as a long human dawn, full of skill, loss, invention, and unanswered questions. The Denisovans fade back into that dawn. So do the Neanderthals, the island humans, the early toolmakers, the people whose coastlines drowned, and the countless communities whose lives left no clear mark. They are gone, but not meaningless. They are part of the deep inheritance beneath every road, every field, every city, every written page, and every hand that still reaches for a tool. Before metal, before memory becomes history, survival is already a story. It is written in stone edges, in old hearths, in vanished paths, and in the fragile body carrying forward what it can. And somewhere beyond the reach of names, in a night older than civilization, the last sparks of a Stone Age fire rise into the dark, brief and glowing, before they disappear into time.